The sound of shattering glass pierced the Nashville night as George Jones drunkenly piloted his riding lawnmower through Tammy Wynette's front window. It wasn't the first time he'd shown up uninvited, but this time was different. This explosive moment would spark decades of legendary feuds, unlikely reconciliations, and even a few million-dollar betrayals that changed country music forever. And trust me, that lawnmower? That's not even the craziest part of this story. Picture this. Nashville, 1977. A lawnmower engine sputters through the quiet suburban night. Not exactly unusual in Tennessee, except this particular mower is being driven by country music superstar George Jones, and he's headed straight for his ex-wife Tammy Wynette's front window. The reason? Every bar in town had refused to serve him, and his car keys had been confiscated. But George Jones wasn't about to let something as trivial as that stop him from confronting the woman who'd broken his heart. What most people don't know is that less than a year later, George would return, this time with a shotgun. After a 3 a.m. phone call where Tammy refused to speak to him, he showed up at her doorstep armed and dangerous. The police standoff lasted 4 hours before Tammy finally agreed to talk. By sunrise, they were sharing coffee at her kitchen table, laughing about old times. That was the nature of country music's most explosive relationship. This wasn't just any divorce. This was the split that would define country music's golden era. George and Tammy weren't just a power couple, they were country music royalty. Their duet Golden Ring had topped the charts just months before their marriage imploded. The irony? During the recording session, their producer Billy Sherrill noticed something wasn't right. George kept missing his cues, and Tammy's voice cracked during what should have been perfect takes. They weren't just singing about a failed marriage, they were living it. The drama spilled into every aspect of Nashville life. Artists were forced to choose sides. Conway Twitty famously refused to record with either of them, saying, "I don't want to be collateral damage in that war." Meanwhile, Loretta Lynn stuck by Tammy, while Merle Haggard publicly defended George. The industry was splitting at the seams. George's spiral continued. He missed so many concerts that he earned the nickname No-Show Jones. His managers started booking him at 2 venues per night, knowing he'd only show up to one, if they were lucky. Promoters began advertising his shows with the tagline, "George Jones might show up." The sad part? It actually increased ticket sales. During one infamous incident in 1979, he missed a major festival appearance and was found in his bus, passed out with the television blaring Tammy's latest performance from the competing stage. Tammy, meanwhile, was building her empire, becoming the first female country artist to earn $1 million in a single year. But success came with its own price. While George was falling apart publicly, Tammy was fighting her own battles behind closed doors. She underwent 26 major surgeries and developed an addiction to painkillers that would eventually contribute to her death. Their daughter Georgette would later reveal that both parents would call her late at night, each asking about the other. In 1980, they agreed to tour together, a decision their managers called commercial suicide. The tour became legendary for all the wrong reasons. During one show in Kansas City, George walked off stage mid-song after spotting Tammy's new husband in the wings. The next night, Tammy dedicated Divorce to George while he watched from backstage. Somehow, they still managed to pack every venue. Their relationship became the stuff of country legend. One day they'd be hurling insults through the press, the next they'd be recording love songs together. During one particularly heated period, George released Did You Ever?, a pointed jab at Tammy's new marriage. She responded with, "Cowboys don't shoot straight like they used to." The back-and-forth battle topped the charts for months. When CBS announced a TV movie about their relationship in 1995, both threatened lawsuits. Then in a twist nobody saw coming, they agreed to consult on the project together. This led to their final album, One. The title track was about former lovers finding peace, and during the recording, studio musicians swear they saw tears in both their eyes. The feuding superstars had finally found their way back, not to romance but to something more valuable, forgiveness. Their last performance together was at a tribute concert in 1997. They sang Golden Ring one final time, and witnesses say you couldn't tell if they were acting or if the emotion was real. Maybe it was both. George would later say in his autobiography, "Tammy and I might have divorced, but we never really split up. Their story became more than just tabloid fodder. It became a blueprint for how country music would handle its internal conflicts for decades to come. And while George and Tammy were rewriting their ending, three queens of country were watching closely, about to show Nashville what real power looked like. Their story would prove that sometimes your biggest competition can become your strongest ally. Step into 1967 Nashville. A young coal miner's daughter is pacing backstage at the Grand Ole Opry, glancing nervously at her competition. In one corner stands the glamorous Tammy Wynette, fresh off her first #1 hit. In the other, a voluptuous blonde from Tennessee named Dolly Parton, whose tight sequin dress and towering hair make Loretta Lynn's homemade gown look positively plain. The press wanted them to hate each other. The record labels tried to pit them against each other. Nashville insiders were taking bets on who would draw first blood. After all, there was only room for one queen of country, or so the men in charge thought. After the show, Tammy found Loretta crying in the dressing room. "They keep saying I need to look more like you," Loretta confessed. Tammy's response? She picked up her phone and called Dolly. Within an hour, all three women were sharing a bottle of wine and trading stories about the men who tried to control their careers. That night, they discovered they had more in common than anyone realized. Each had been told to change everything about herself to succeed. That night sparked an alliance that would change country music forever. While the industry expected catfights, these women were secretly meeting in each other's homes, sharing songs and plotting their takeover. They called themselves the Honky Tonk Angels Alliance, a name they'd later use for their groundbreaking collaboration album. Their solidarity manifested in unexpected ways. When a prominent producer tried to pressure Dolly into an unwanted relationship, Loretta and Tammy started showing up to her recording sessions uninvited. When critics attacked Loretta's controversial "The Pill," both Dolly and Tammy covered the song in their live shows. And when Tammy was hospitalized for exhaustion in 1974, her shows were quietly covered by her two friends who refused to take payment. The industry's attempts to create rivalry backfired spectacularly. When Dolly wrote Jolene in 1973, rumors flew that it was about Loretta stealing her husband. The truth? Loretta had actually helped Dolly confront a real-life bank teller who had been flirting with Dolly's husband, Carl Dean. Tammy showed up with a baseball bat, just in case things got ugly. That same year, when Porter Wagoner tried to prevent Dolly from going solo, Loretta and Tammy helped finance her first independent tour. Their friendship was tested in 1975 when all three were nominated for Entertainer of the Year. The press tried desperately to create friction, publishing manufactured quotes and stage photos, suggesting backstage drama. Instead, they showed up to the CMA Awards wearing matching dresses they'd secretly designed together. When Loretta won, both Dolly and Tammy rushed the stage to hug her before her husband could get there. The photos of their celebration became a symbol of female solidarity in country music. Behind the scenes, they were fighting battles bigger than personal rivalry. They shared wage information, revealing how male artists were making 3 times their salary for the same shows. They boycotted producers who demanded special favors for radio play. When one prominent DJ tried to blacklist Dolly over her too-pop sound, Loretta and Tammy threatened to pull their music from his station. Together, they challenged the industry's double standards about appearance, marriage, and subject matter in their songs. Their alliance extended to their personal lives, too. When Tammy's marriage to George Jones was falling apart, she found refuge at Dolly's Tennessee mountain home. When Loretta needed surgery, Dolly and Tammy took turns caring for her children. They became godmothers to each other's kids, shared holiday traditions, and created a support system that would last decades. Their friendship changed the rules of engagement in Nashville. While male artists were still playing the lone wolf, these women proved there was power in numbers. They showed that success didn't require tearing others down. It could be achieved by lifting each other up. But just as they were cementing their alliance, a different kind of war was brewing. One that would pit traditional country values against a new outlaw movement and spark a civil war that would make their feud look like a church picnic. Music Row, 1972. Merle Haggard stands at the podium of the CMA Awards, accepting his trophy while glaring at a bearded figure slouching in the back row. That figure is Willie Nelson, who'd just been labeled a disgrace to country music for growing his hair long and playing with rock musicians. What nobody knew was that this moment would ignite the biggest Civil War country music had ever seen. The battle lines were clear as crystal. On one side stood the Nashville establishment, the clean-cut, suit-wearing traditionalists led by Haggard, who believed country music needed to stay pure. The other side? A ragtag army of long-haired rebels who'd soon be known as the Outlaw movement, with Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings leading the charge. But this wasn't just about music. It was about money, power, and the soul of country music itself. The real roots of this war trace back to Austin, Texas, 1971. Willie Nelson, after watching his house burn down, decided to quit music entirely. Instead, he stumbled into Austin's Armadillo World headquarters, a venue where hippies and cowboys somehow coexisted. What he saw changed everything. College kids dancing to country music played by long-haired musicians. "I realized Nashville didn't have a monopoly on country music," Willie later said. "They just had a monopoly on the business." The first shot was fired when Willie walked away from RCA Records, owing them $100,000. Instead of declaring bankruptcy, he threw legendary picnics in Texas, charging fans to help pay his debt. The 1973 picnic drew 40,000 people in 100-degree heat. They watched Willie share the stage with Waylon Jennings, Chris Christopherson, and even rock bands like ZZ Top. To Nashville's horror, everyone played together. Chet Atkins, RCA's head producer, launched a counterattack. He banned session musicians from working with any artist who recorded outside Nashville. The musicians' response? They quit and followed Willie to Texas. The Outlaw movement had its army. Haggard didn't hold back. "They're destroying everything Hank Williams built," he declared to the press. The irony? Hank himself had been considered a controversial rebel in his day, but Willie's response cut deeper. "Maybe Merle forgot that Johnny Cash was once banned from the Opry for kicking out footlights. We're not destroying country music. We're taking it back." The war escalated when Waylon Jennings joined Willie's side. After a showdown with RCA executives over creative control, Waylon barricaded himself in a studio with armed guards, refusing to come out until the label gave him full artistic freedom. The standoff lasted 3 days, fueled by cocaine and determination. Waylon emerged victorious, and with the first independently produced country album in history, Lonesome, Ornery, and Mean. Nashville's old guard fought dirty. Radio stations received mysterious calls suggesting Willie's picnics promoted drug use. Venues were pressured to cancel Outlaw shows. Music Row executives started rumors about Willie's tax problems. But the harder they pushed, the more fans rallied around the Outlaws. The establishment's biggest mistake? Underestimating the power of authenticity. While Nashville pushed manufactured stars in rhinestone suits, the Outlaws wore jeans and braids. While Music Row songs celebrated traditional values, Waylon sang about cocaine and broken marriages. "We told the truth," Waylon said, and the truth made Nashville nervous. The war divided friendships and families. Conway Twitty refused to take sides, losing respect from both camps. Tom Paul Glaser's studio became an outlaw sanctuary, leading to a bitter feud with his brothers. Even George Jones straddled the line, recording with Willie while maintaining his Nashville ties. The industry's desperation showed in 1975 when they created the new traditionalist movement. They gave artists like John Anderson and Ricky Skaggs the same creative freedom they denied the Outlaws, hoping to win back the audience. But the genie was out of the bottle. The war reached its peak in 1976 with Wanted the Outlaws, featuring Willie, Waylon, Tom Paul Glaser, and Jesse Coulter. Nashville executives predicted it would flop. Instead, it became the first country music album to go platinum. The album's success exposed an uncomfortable truth. The fans wanted authenticity more than polish. By 1978, even Merle Haggard had to admit defeat. In a surprising twist, he showed up unannounced at Willie's 4th of July picnic. Walking on stage during Willie's set, Merle pulled out his guitar. The crowd fell silent as these two titans faced each other. Then Merle started the opening chords of Okie from Muskogee, his anti-hippie anthem. But this time he winked at Willie and changed the lyrics. "We don't smoke marijuana in Muskogee." Much. The war was over. The aftermath transformed country music forever. The Outlaws proved you could succeed outside the system. They showed that country music could embrace other genres without losing its soul. Most importantly, they restored the voice of authenticity to a genre built on telling truth through song. But the story doesn't end there. Three men who'd been at the center of the Civil War, Willie, Waylon, and a certain man in black, would soon unite to form country music's most legendary supergroup. But before the Highwaymen could ride, there was one late-night phone call that would change everything. The phone rang at 3 a.m. in Johnny Cash's Tennessee mansion. On the line was Waylon Jennings, his voice shaking. "John, I need help. I'm either going to die or kill somebody." It was 1983 and Waylon's cocaine addiction had hit rock bottom. Johnny's response, "Stay there, and if anyone comes near you, shoot them. I'm on my way." By sunrise, Waylon was detoxing in Johnny's guest room. Willie Nelson showed up that afternoon, bringing his guitar and enough marijuana to, as he put it, ease the landing. What started as an intervention turned into a 3-day jam session that would birth the most powerful alliance in country music history. These weren't just any country stars finding common ground. Each had carved their own territory in the industry. Cash was the towering figure who'd gone from pill-popping rebel to gospel-singing elder statesman. Waylon had taken outlaw country to new heights while fighting a $1,500 a day cocaine habit. Willie had reinvented himself from clean-cut Nashville songwriter to braided hippie country philosopher. The path to their alliance was paved with betrayals. In 1961, Cash had poached Waylon's entire band for a tour, leaving him stranded in Phoenix. A decade later, Waylon publicly mocked Cash's born-again Christian phase, calling it temporary insanity. Willie had once sold Cash's publishing rights without permission to cover gambling debts. Yet here they were, three kings of country, holding court in a mansion filled with withdrawal screams and guitar strings. During those 3 days, something unprecedented happened. Between Waylon's fever dreams and Johnny's gospel songs, they started writing together. Willie pulled out an old Highwaymen folk song he'd been working on. As Cash's deep bass rumbled the chorus and Waylon's trembling hands found the guitar chords, they created a sound that would change country music forever. Their label executives were horrified. "You can't have 4 headliners on one stage," they argued. "Nobody's ego will survive." They offered each artist solo deals worth twice as much. The response came in unison. "We ride together." Columbia Records finally caved, but with a condition: they had to add Chris Christopherson to the mix. The Rhodes scholar-turned-songwriter brought literary depth to their outlaw grit. The recording sessions became the stuff of legend. They'd book the studio for 2 weeks but stay for a month. Engineers recall Cash and Waylon arguing over a single word in Highwaymen for 6 hours straight. Willie would fall asleep on the couch, wake up, play a perfect solo, then doze off again. Christopherson would recite Shakespeare between takes, inspiring Waylon to quip, "I didn't know whether to sing or go back to school." They made a sacred pact. No one performs alone. If one stumbled, the others carried him. When Cash relapsed in '85, they'd surround his microphone during shows, physically holding him up. When Waylon's hands shook too bad to play guitar, Willie would stand closer, playing loud enough for both of them. When Christopherson forgot lyrics, they'd all intentionally mess up to cover for him. Their tours became legendary for what happened off stage. They traveled in separate buses but insisted their vehicles be parked in a circle every night, creating a private compound they called Fort Apache. Inside the sanctuary, they'd share their deepest fears: getting old, becoming irrelevant, fighting demons that never quite died. June Carter Cash would cook for everyone, while Jessie Coulter, Waylon's wife, gave impromptu piano concerts. These late-night sessions spawned some of their most powerful songs. The last cowboy song came from Cash lamenting the dying breed they represented. American Remains was born after Willie watched a young country star lip-sync on TV and declared, "We might be dinosaurs, but at least we're real ones." By 1995, they'd recorded 3 albums together and grossed over $100 million in tours. But their real legacy was showing Nashville that there was room for multiple kings, that competition could coexist with brotherhood. As Willie would later say, "We were all supposed to be rivals, but we figured out pretty quick that we were stronger as a family." The story of these 3 kings would shape country music's next chapter. But even as they ruled together, a new war was brewing, one that would make their old battles look tame as modern country faced its biggest identity crisis yet. December 1992. Travis Tritt stands in the green room of the CMA Awards, ripping a Billy Ray Cyrus poster off the wall. "That ain't country," he growls at anyone who'll listen. Achy Breaky Heart had just spent 5 weeks at #1, and Tritt was about to ignite country music's most vicious modern feud. But this wasn't just about one song with a catchy dance move. This was about the soul of country music in the modern era. On one side stood the traditionalists like Tritt, Alan Jackson, and George Strait. On the other, a new wave of pop country stars led by Garth Brooks, whose concerts looked more like Kiss shows than Honky Tonk nights. The real explosion came during the 1993 CMA Awards. Alan Jackson was supposed to perform his hit, Chattahoochee. Instead, he ordered his band to play Gone Country, wearing a Hank Williams t-shirt with the sleeves cut off. The producer tried to cut his mic, but Jackson had anticipated this. He'd brought his own sound system. The message was clear. The traditionalists weren't going down without a fight. Behind the scenes, the battle was even uglier. Radio stations were being pressured to choose sides. Label executives were offering bonuses to producers who could make traditional artists sound more contemporary. Some artists even found their tour buses mysteriously unable to fuel up in certain towns. The war reached new heights when the Dixie Chicks entered the fray. Initially embraced as traditionalists with their bluegrass roots, they soon became lightning rods for controversy. Their crime? Suggesting that modern country had lost its way. The backlash was swift and brutal. Radio stations didn't just ban their music. They organized public destructions of their CDs. Garth Brooks, meanwhile, was breaking every rule in the country music playbook. He flew over audiences on zip lines, smashed guitars on stage, and openly admitted to being influenced by Kiss and Queen. Traditionalists were furious, but they couldn't argue with the numbers. Brooks was selling more albums than any country artist in history. The identity crisis deepened when Faith Hill and Shania Twain crossed over to pop radio. Traditional country stations faced a dilemma. Play the crossover hits their audiences wanted to hear, or stick to their guns and lose listeners. Many chose survival over purity, leading to what George Jones famously called the death of real country music. By 2000, the battle lines had shifted. It wasn't just about sound anymore. It was about authenticity itself. Country rap emerged with artists like Kid Rock collaborating with Willie Nelson. Pop stars like Jewel and Darius Rucker were reinventing themselves as country artists. The genre was evolving faster than anyone could define it. The war reached its symbolic peak at the 2003 ACM Awards. In a moment of either genius or madness, producers paired Travis Tritt with Shania Twain for a duet. The performance was a disaster. Tritt deliberately sang off-key, while Twain responded by cranking up her pop vocals. The awkward 4 minutes became a metaphor for the genre's identity crisis. The old guard tried one last stand. George Strait, Alan Jackson, and Reba McEntire formed the Country Music First Coalition, demanding radio stations maintain a minimum percentage of traditional country. Their campaign slogan? "If you don't know George Jones, you don't know country." The movement gained traction until Jones himself, surprisingly, spoke out against it, saying, "Country music's big enough for everybody now." The modern era has seen these battle lines blur even further. When Lil Nas X's Old Town Road dominated charts in 2019, it reignited debates about what constitutes country music. But this time, something was different. Young country artists openly embraced the crossover, suggesting that perhaps the genre's strength lay in its ability to evolve. Today's country landscape would be unrecognizable to the outlaws and traditionalists of old. But maybe that's the point. As Willie Nelson recently observed, country music is like a tree. The roots stay the same, but the branches keep reaching in new directions. The war isn't over, it's just changed battlegrounds. But amidst these modern conflicts, something unexpected happened. Some of country's biggest rivals found common ground in the most unlikely places. Nashville, 1969. Johnny Cash walks into Columbia Records with an unlikely request. He wants to record with Bob Dylan. The label executives laugh it off. Country music's Man in Black collaborating with folk music's most controversial poet? It would never work. 2 weeks later, Cash and Dylan released Girl from the North Country, proving that music's greatest friendships often cross genre lines. But this wasn't just about two icons making music. This was about breaking down the walls that had separated country music from the rest of the industry. Cash had seen something in Dylan that Nashville couldn't understand. Authenticity transcends genre. The ripple effects were immediate. Suddenly, country artists were being spotted at rock concerts. Rock stars were making pilgrimages to the Grand Ole Opry. When Willie Nelson and Ray Charles recorded Seven Spanish Angels, it wasn't just a hit, it was a revolution. Here was country music's outlaw king harmonizing with R&B's genius, creating something entirely new. The most surprising friendship emerged between Merle Haggard and the Grateful Dead's Jerry Garcia. They met at a guitar shop in 1971, argued about amplifiers for hours, then spent the night trading licks and whiskey shots. Garcia would later say, "Merle taught me that country music isn't about the hat you wear, it's about the truth you tell." When Charlie Pride became country's first black superstar, he faced resistance from all sides. But George Jones and Conway Twitty personally opened for him in hostile territories, using their influence to ensure he got fair treatment. Pride later revealed that Jones would sometimes switch venues last minute if a promoter showed any hesitation about the lineup. The boundaries continued to blur. Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers' friendship challenged the notion that male and female country stars had to be romantic interests. Their platonic partnership produced hits like Islands in the Stream, but more importantly, it showed that men and women could be equals in the industry. Some friendships saved lives. When Waylon Jennings was battling cocaine addiction, it wasn't his country music peers who helped him get clean. It was Neil Young. The rock star moved into Waylon's Nashville home for a month, helping him through withdrawals by teaching him meditation techniques learned from the Beatles. By the 90s, these cross-genre friendships had become commonplace. Johnny Cash was covering 9 Inch Nails. Snoop Dogg was hanging out at Willie Nelson's ranch. Kid Rock and Hank Williams Jr. were hunting together. The lines between genres had become so blurred that the music industry didn't know how to categorize these collaborations. But perhaps the most powerful story comes from Elvis Presley and Waylon Jennings. Young Waylon was playing bass for Buddy Holly when he gave up his seat on that fateful plane to the Big Bopper. After Holly's death, Waylon fell into depression. It was Elvis who sought him out, sharing his own survivor's guilt over his twin brother's death. Their friendship, rarely publicized, lasted until Elvis's death. These unlikely alliances didn't just create great music. They changed the culture of country music itself. They proved that authenticity recognizes authenticity, regardless of genre, race, or background. As Willie Nelson put it, good music is good music. Everything else is just packaging. Today, these cross-genre friendships have become the norm. Country stars collaborate with rappers, indie rockers, and pop stars without raising eyebrows. The walls that once divided music genres have crumbled thanks to those early pioneers who dared to reach across the aisle. And maybe that's the real legacy of country music's greatest feuds and friendships. The understanding that music, like life itself, is richer when we break down the barriers that divide us. Nashville 2024. The Country Music Hall of Fame displays an odd collection that tells our story. George Jones riding lawnmower, Willie Nelson's bandana from the Highwaymen tour, and Tammy Wynette's baseball bat. Each item represents not just a feud, but a reconciliation. From George and Tammy's explosive drama to Willie and Merle's standoff. From competing queens to warring outlaws, these weren't just industry squabbles. They were battles for country music's soul that forged the genre's strongest bonds. As Dolly Parton said, "In country music, we fight like family because we are family." Maybe that's what makes these stories special. Their ability to transform conflict into harmony, rivalry into brotherhood, and feuds into friendships. And somewhere in Nashville tonight, 2 rising stars are probably arguing about country music's future. But if history's taught us anything, they'll likely write a hit song together tomorrow. After all, that's the country way.